I'm here to introduce Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom.
All right.
As you know, he has a deep commitment to public service after a successful business career serving all of us as residents of Northern California. We're in Northern California, right? First on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, then as mayor of San Francisco, where he was the youngest mayor in over 100 years. Well, that was pretty amazing. He still looks pretty young. And now Lieutenant Governor, elected in 2010 and re-elected in 2014. He has often taken stands on issues such as equality, homelessness, and universal health care that we were talking about this morning when they weren't popular, and championed things that were just the right thing to do. And the populace eventually followed in his footsteps. Since being elected Lieutenant Governor, he has been devoted to economic development and ensuring California remains at the forefront of job creation and innovation. And it's not surprising because in his early career, he started 10 businesses. It's pretty amazing. He's a big fan of public-private partnerships because he used them in San Francisco to champion new ways to build affordable housing. And in 2007, he signed the Health Choices Plan to bring universal health care to all San Francisco residents. He's a big champion of education, serving as a regent to the University of California and as a trustee of the California State University. And he published his first book in 2013, Citizenville, How to Take the Town Square Digital and Reinvent Government. So a lot of the things that we're talking about this morning in terms of internet and broadband access, again, he's talking about as well. I met Gavin when he was mayor of San Francisco, and I was working with an organization I founded called Pacific Community Ventures, which is focused on providing loans and capital and mentoring to businesses in low-income communities to build job creation and better neighborhoods. And so it's my pleasure again to welcome him to Santa Cruz in the Monterey Bay, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom.
Thank you, bud. Thank you, bud. Well, thank you all. There's nothing worse than entering a conference where you miss the whole morning and you don't have a flavor of the day. You don't have a sense of what's been said. But you do have a sense by whom has said what they've said. And I know I miss Lenny and a few others talking about infrastructure and health and child wellness and issues that, of course, unite all of us up and down the state. You'll be talking about public safety in a moment. And so I'll try to contextualize the best I can my remarks and try to make them relevant to the thematics that unite all of you here today. Let me just introduce myself anew. And I'm grateful for Bud's introduction. But tell you a little bit about my background and tell you a little bit about my bias. And then I will make an argument that I hope some of you will embrace. But I imagine not all of you. And that's why I look forward to the conversation that will ensue shortly after I'm done with my remarks. A little bit of background. I have a strong bias because of my personal experience as a small business person, a bias towards entrepreneurialism. I started right out of college, a small college just over the hill here, Santa Clara University, and opened a small little wine store with one part-time employee, Pat Kelly, who remarkably is still with us here today. We now have 18 small businesses, close to 1,000 employees in the state. I say that not to impress you, but to impress upon you that bias. A bias for entrepreneurs, a bias to private enterprise. I say that as a progressive Democrat. I say that as someone that believes, my core, that you cannot tax your way to prosperity, but nor, as Bud referenced, as a member of the CSU Board of Trustees and the UC Regents, nor can you cut your way to to prosperity. You've got to grow your way to prosperity. I came across a wonderful quote that summed up this bias. It was a quote from Winston Churchill, of all people. I thought I had seen most of Churchill's musings and repeated a lot of things that he said, but I never read or learned or saw anything he said about private enterprise. He had a wonderful quote. He said, "Some people see private enterprise as a predatory tiger that needs to be shot. Some see private enterprise as a cow that needs to be milked. Not enough people see it for what it actually is, a healthy horse pulling a sturdy wagon." I think it's a wonderful way to describe at least my bias, and I hope some of the bias in the room, but certainly not all of the bias in the room. But that bias is also predicated on another fundamental belief, not just a belief in risk-taking, not just that belief in entrepreneurialism and private enterprise, but a belief in this fundamental principle, and that is a belief in pluralism. See, I've had the privilege that I never could have imagined having, and that was being born in the San Francisco Bay Area, being born down in San Francisco and growing up in the Marina District, fifth generation San Franciscan. My kids, I have a 6-year-old, a 3, and a 2-year-old, sixth generation Californian, sixth generation San Franciscans. And here we are in that broader region in one of the most diverse parts of the state. In the most diverse state, California, in the world's most diverse democracy, the United States of America. And I want you to think about that for a second. Because the more I travel, the more people are mesmerized. For all the challenges, we are hardly perfect, quite the contrary. You don't have to think farther than Ferguson to recognize how imperfect we are. But when I think about the broader principles that make California great, it's the fact that by and large, at our best, we don't tolerate our diversity, we celebrate our diversity. We, at our best, celebrate what Bill Clinton would love to say, all our interesting differences, right? But at the end of the day, we unite around, Dr. King would say, we unite around those things that bind us together. We're all, remember he said this, all bound together by a web of mutuality. We're all in this together. And I think when we look at the world we're living in and we look at the trend lines that define this world, those that practice pluralism have a profound advantage in this world. The return on pluralism has never been higher. This is a fundamental value and a fundamental principle that I think defines, again, not only our proud present, but will define our proud future if we embrace those principles and practice pluralism into the future. So those are my opening comments, extending 2 biases. Now, my argument. The question that I don't think we ask, let alone answer, in fact, for the 5 years I've been in Sacramento, I have never heard this question asked, and as a consequence, it's never been answered, and that is, for me, the most important question that could and should be asked, and that is, what world are we living in? And what are the trend lines that define this world? And how can we in California take advantage of those trends? And I think it's a profoundly important question because I think something really big is happening, not only in just state, but this nation, but around the world. And you touched on it, Bud, just a moment ago, and you touched on it, I'm sure, earlier today, and that's the detonation of IT and globalization. A world, as Tom Friedman referred to it, no longer connected, but hyper-connected. The plumbing of the world has radically changed. Something big has happened in the last decade. We're at what some refer to as a hinge moment in the global construct. The economy is changing, technology is changing, and demographics are radically changing. Something really big and profound is happening, all at the same time. And that's changing the way we live, the way we work, the way we play. It's changing everything. And as a consequence, the biggest change we're experiencing is the experience that now we're all, I think, understanding more intimately, particularly those of us that are from San Francisco or were watching the elections as recent as yesterday in San Francisco. As we've gone from something old to something new, there's a recognition that the industrial economy has run out of gas. It's an atrophy. It's stalled. Don Tapscott's writing a lot about this. He says the industrial economy is simply failing all around us. Let me make a point. What do I mean by that? Top-down hierarchical institutions are giving way to something radically new and different. Just 10 years ago, Tom Friedman, that same Friedman who talks about the world being hyper-connected, made this point about as compellingly as it possibly could. In fact, it wasn't 10 years ago he made the point. It was 3 years ago when Lenny invited me to interview him at an economic summit in Silicon Valley. And we asked Tom rhetorically, what world are we living in? And he answered it by saying the following. He said, you know, Gavin, I wrote a book, 2005, called The World is Flat. I said, Tom, I remember. He said, I sold 4.6 million copies. I said, congratulations. I said, my book didn't sell anywhere near that. What's your point? He said, it's a book about technology and globalization. I coined the term, the world is flat. He says, go back in the first edition of that book, New York Times bestseller, 2005, 2006. Go back under the index under F, FA, FAC. Facebook is not even in the book. He says, Facebook for most people, when I wrote that book, didn't exist. He said, Twitter was a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking space. LinkedIn, a prison. Applications were things you filled out to get into the University of Santa Cruz. Big data was a rap star. And Skype, for most of us, was a typo. None of those things existed. And now they're ubiquitous in our lives. Making the point, we're no longer connected, but hyper-connected. Something big has happened to the plumbing of this earth. Now, that was 3 or 4 years ago when he made that argument. Fast forward to the debate we had yesterday in San Francisco with Airbnb. What a remarkable company. Brian Chesky, 2007, moves from Southern California, moves from back east, 06, Southern California, 07, moves in the Mission District in San Francisco, doesn't know what the heck he's doing. He's hanging out on the couch with his roommate. He's trying to figure out what his life's all about. No technology backgrounds whatsoever. He's a design background guy. He reads a big article in the paper. It says, no one could find hotel rooms in San Francisco. There's this huge convention down at the Moscone facility. Gets a harebrained idea because he's been sleeping on one of them. He had 2 blow-up mattresses. And he says, you know what? I wonder if we rent those 2 mattresses, and if I could convince my roommate, who's a hell of a chef, to do breakfast, maybe I can go down to Kinko's, get a flyer, and rent out that room to someone that can't find a hotel room or is down in South San Francisco or maybe made their way over the hill to Santa Cruz. Wants to be close to the convention. Went out there and rented out for a few nights those mattresses. Made almost as much money as he needed to pay his half of the rent. Was a great idea, but it wasn't a business. Until a few months later, he read about this guy named Barack Obama, who was going to Denver, Colorado, small town in Colorado, and what was the #1 complaint? Too many people. Huge, huge number of people, a record number of folks expected in that 08 convention to descend on Denver. No one could find a hotel room. So he picked up the phone and started calling some friends and cousins and family members and getting their friends to see if he can aggregate 6 or 7, 8, 9, 10 rooms. Went out there and went to Kinko's again, handed out some flyers, and some guy from CNN decided to do an interest story about what the heck's going on around the convention. The rest is history. But what is that history? Brian made this point the other day. It was, for me, just gave me pause. He says, you know, Gavin, we'll be the first company in human history to do business in every country on planet Earth. In the history of mankind, no company has ever done business in every country. I said, Coca-Cola. He said, not even close. Coca-Cola. I said, what country? He said, well, at the time, he said, there are 3. One of them was Cuba. Well, you just may have seen the headlines. They're in Cuba now. Other one was Syria, not surprisingly. And then the one that certainly doesn't surprise you, North Korea. But he is convinced by this time next year, he'll be that first company in human history to do business in every country on planet Earth. Just like that. Now, what's amazing about that is not just that story. What's amazing about that is, you know this, they're the largest accommodations provider in the world, and they own no real estate. Man, when I was mayor, the reason I became mayor, I think this is interesting. No one really cares. It always mattered to me. I always loved the punditry and why they thought I became mayor. There's only one reason. Because of my passion to reform the taxi cab industry. Now, that's rather striking because it was a complete failure, my efforts. What I did is I did what politicians do. I put together a task force to improve the taxi industry. It bought me some time. A lot of reporters came up. I said, I got good people representing a cross-section of the industry. A few months later, they came out with a report. Not much else. So I, as desperate as I was, decided what we needed was a commission. So we decided to put together a taxi cab commission. A year went by. You still couldn't get a taxi cab. Costs were going up. Complaints were increasing. People were frustrated. And so what I did is I merged the commission into another commission, creating a super commission so we could collaborate more effectively. When that didn't work, I still was being rewarded the whole time. It's amazing. People were so pleased, like, thank you for caring about this. Thank you for trying. No sooner did that failure get codified than I started running for lieutenant governor, and some guy comes along with a damn app. Some guy named Travis comes along with an app. What I spent 15 years, I'm not making that up, 15 years. I spent 17 in local government, 15 of them on the taxi cab issue. Literally like that, in one calendar year, front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, you can look this up, I am not exaggerating, front page headline, 75% reduction in the number of taxi cab pickups and drop-offs in one calendar year because of Uber. In one calendar year. That's disruption. Just like that, overnight. I remember, it's ironic that it was the Chronicle, because I remember a few years back in 2006, I was sitting there talking about the future of the newspaper industry. This guy named Phil Bronstein, you may remember. Married to Sharon Stone, if you remember that. But a big shot, big shot. Didn't like me much, but a big shot. Big shot. The Hearst Corporation, running the newspaper. And he was sitting there in a group, I swear, literally about the size of this room. I was sitting in the back, talking about the future of the newspaper industry, and someone in the corner goes, excuse me, Phil, excuse me, what about this guy, Craig? And people are like, Craig, and then someone else in the other corner goes, yeah, that guy with the list. And I remember Bronstein, I swear, it was like yesterday. Bronstein goes, oh, Craig Newmark. He goes, we got that. We got that. Well, isn't that ironic, right? 79, Economist Magazine came out with an article last year, 79 major newspapers in North America gone out of business in the last 10 years. Chronicles of essence of itself. To their credit, they still exist. They've been nimble enough that they're still relevant, which is extraordinary. But that entire business model was gutted overnight when Craig came along with that list. When Travis came along with an app, the entire taxi cab industry was disrupted. Fortune was just spent trying to defeat Airbnb because the hotel industry is nervous about it for good reason. Something big is happening here. If you still think I'm exaggerating, just think back not too many years ago when a guy named Steve, I had just become mayor, runs up on stage at the Moscone, 5,000 people in a room. I'm sitting there right in the front row going, this is a great gig. He runs up on stage, ladies and gentlemen, iPod. No one knew what hit him. Just around the corner. It's been vacant for about 10 of the last 11 years. The old Virgin Megastore, I spent 2 hours in line to meet my hero, Richard Branson, at the opening of that Virgin Megastore. I thought I'd be around for my grandkids. It was out of business like that after Steve came up with this thing called the iPod. I haven't bought an album since. You probably haven't either. Like that disrupted the entire music industry. The world now being customized around you. That's disruption. That's the world we're living in. Think about your business. Think about your business model. Who's the guy walking around with that app? How secure are you about your future? How confident you are things are going to continue to go the long way that they've gone in the last 10 or 15 years, in the next 10 or 15 years? If you think we're exaggerating, consider some of the best-selling books today at any airport in any part of this country. Tyler Cowen's best-selling book, Average is Over. What's that book about? He talks about the rise of the rest. He begins with that old Texas saw. It says, you continue to do what you've done, you're not going to get what you got. Not in a world of the rise of the rest, not when you're competing with 1.1 billion people that have entered the workforce just in the last 20 years. How about Andrew McAfee wrote a book you have to read. This is absolute essential reading, called The Second Machine Age. If for nothing else, read the first 2 chapters. It will knock your socks off. He says, we ain't seen nothing yet. He says, it's been interesting the last 10 years, but it's nothing like the next 10. And he talks about it in the context of all of us moving to the second half of the chessboard. And you go, what the heck is that? And he tells this wonderful story about the guy who invented chess, right? I guess there was someone who invented chess. It makes sense. I don't know if I believe this story, but I'll repeat it anyway to extend the misinformation. Can't hold me accountable. These are his words, not mine. He's talking about this guy who invents chess, and he goes to the king, says, I've been summoned, Your Highness. I'm honored to be here. What have you asked me here for? He says, well, sir, you have given mankind something truly extraordinary, this thing, chess. I am so touched by your contribution to humanity. I, sir, will offer you anything you wish. What, sir, would you like? The inventor of chess sat there and looked down. He said, sir, I care nothing more than this to feed my family. I'm a humble man. I'm so honored that you've offered this. And he said, well, what would you like? He says, well, nothing more than this. I would just like 1 grain of salt for every square on chessboard doubled. We'll start with 1. I'm humble. 2, next square, 4, 8, 16, 32. The king goes, 60. I got this. He says, you shall have it. He went off to take a nap. All of a sudden, the king gets woken up. Minutes later, sire, you've been duped. And the king says, what are you referring to? He says, well, we got to the second half of the chessboard. 63 squares, sir. And if you double that grain of salt for every single square, 63 doubled, went to 18 quintillion grains of rice. More than all of the rice that's been produced in human history. You have been duped. So what did the king do? He did what you probably would do if you were king at that time. He beheaded the inventor of chess. Now that's the probably made up part of the story. But what's interesting is Andrew argues we're entering the second half of the chessboard. While the doubling's been interesting, Moore's Law, in the last 10 years, 64, it's interesting. When you get to the second half of the chessboard, put on your seatbelt. And what he means by that is now we're seeing the merger of not just IT and globalization in that construct, but you're seeing something more pronounced and powerful. You're seeing now the combinatorial nature of technology, what some refer to as the stacking of technology, where exponential change occurs in real time. That's disruption at a whole nother level. That's artificial intelligence merging with big data. That's genomics merging with synthetic biology. That's what's going on with smart metals and additive manufacturing, 3D printing folks talk about, which, by the way, I know intimately because I have a new winery. We printed out a bottle that has never been produced in the history of mankind because it was produced at Autodesk by my friend Carl Bass with a CAD drawing. It's real. Robotics, sensors, the internet, obviously, of everything. Something big is happening. And so it begs the question, that question, what world are we living in? What are the trend lines that define that world? And how can we take advantage of those trend lines? Let me reset and close. I'm happy to be here because you get it. See, I'm one of those guys, probably not dissimilar to a lot of you. I can't stand what's going on in Washington, D.C., and I've been frustrated in the past, certainly. It's gotten a heck of a lot better. But I've been frustrated in the past by what's happening or not happening in Sacramento, or the short-term interests of, well, the long-term interests of the state are getting pitted against the short-term interests of folks up in Sacramento over and over and over again. But one thing I know is if you don't like the way the world looks when you're standing up, stand on your head. Go local. Remarkable things are happening at the local level. It's an antidote for all the cynicism. For everything that's not happening with nations, extraordinary things are happening in regions. And that's why when working with Lenny and others, we put together an economic development strategy called Regions Rising Together. And that's the framework that unites all of you. Connecting dots. All the great work you're doing in Monterey County, all the great work you're doing in a different silo, Santa Cruz, other places. Now you're coming together, recognizing your mutual interests and recognizing you have agency. And that's so profoundly important. See, I've been inculcated with this belief that someone's going to come save the day. I don't know, it's that John Wayne mystique, right? The guy or gal on the white horse is going to save the day. Heck, I'll be promoting that in 3 years on all kinds of advertisements, telling you how I'm going to come save the day in California. And I'm just hoping you're going to buy it. So I don't want you to remember this conversation. But that attitude, frankly, is the reason we're in the mess we're in. There's a great billboard. How many of you have been on the 405 in L.A.? Right, you laughed, so you know where I'm going, which is nowhere, right? Because the traffic. There's a great billboard on the 405. I saw this, and it says, "You're not stuck in traffic." I'm like, what the hell is that? And you drive up, you get about 100 yards, 20 minutes later, you get under the billboard, and you see in parentheses, you get this bold headline, "You're not stuck in traffic," and then in parentheses it says, "You are traffic." Right? I know. Right? What a message. Society becomes how we behave. We are our behaviors. The world that exists today, it's happened on our watch. We're not bystanders. We have agency. It's not interesting to point fingers. It's not that interesting to buy into this notion someone else is going to solve the problem. Stuff, with all due respect, Jeb Bush, doesn't just have to happen. It doesn't. We have agency. Leadership can be found anywhere. See, the old paradigm was you vote, I decide. Pretty damn dull, right? No wonder you don't vote, right? I do things to you after Election Day when you're living in a world where you want people to do things with you. All your businesses, any of you who are successful today, you understand this at the core. You're having a two-way conversation with your customers. But in government, someone described this, Donald Kettle one day, government, we're just a big vending machine. You put in $1 taxes, and you get limited choices. Police, fire, healthcare, education. national defense. And if you don't like what you get, well, tough. You can kick the machine. We've all done that. You can shake it. But it's this machine thinking. You vote, I decide. You're not participatory in that process of delivery. That's got to give way to a new mindset. It's not monologues anymore. It's a dialogue. It's two-way conversations. Everything needs to be designed for participation. Everything in your private life, your personal life, needs to be designed for participation. Two-way conversations. It's no longer command and control. In many respects, leadership today is defined by what you're doing today, climate control. You know that story about what happened in 2004? It was amazing, a little over 10 years ago. And it's relevant because we had our first rain the other day. Almost 7 inches of rain fell overnight in Death Valley in the fall of 2004. It was all over the national news in the spring of 2005. People didn't pay attention to that rain. Those living down there did. But the world paid attention to what happened in 2005. My friend, this wonderful guy, Ken Robinson, told me this story. And he described what happened that spring accordingly. He says, it turns out, after all, Death Valley wasn't dead. It was dormant. He said the seeds of possibility have been planted years and years before, waiting for the right conditions to come along. And he said when the right conditions come along, success becomes irresistible. See, Tyler Valley in the spring of 2005 was carpeted with wildflowers. Because of those rains, Death Valley wasn't dead after all, it was dormant, waiting for the right conditions to come along. Isn't that a wonderful way to think about the work you're doing in this partnership? Creating those conditions. You were talking about planting those seeds all morning, right? Prenatal care, not just early childhood education. You want to get serious about education reform? Start in the womb. Serious. Look at the science. 0 to 2. Focus on those health indexes. Focus on affordability so people can live together at every income level. Focus on infrastructure. We live in a country, infrastructure that's best described as the Flintstones. Right? Whole idea is thinking anew about what leadership means in this new paradigm. Final, truly final point. And then I look forward to what's on your mind. I think the biggest challenge today is a challenge that is hardly new. Plutarch. You all remember Plutarch, right? A couple of you remember Plutarch. I hope our chancellor and president remember Plutarch. He was whatever you want to call him. He was a historian, he was a teacher, whatever you want to call him, in Athens close to 2,000 years ago. Plutarch said the following as a warning to the Athenians. He said, the imbalance between the rich and the poor is the oldest and most fatal ailment of all republics. Think about that. In around 50 AD, an historian was warning the Athenian people about the imbalance between the rich and the poor being the oldest and most fatal ailment of all republics. Fast forward to the United States of America, where 42% of people that are born into poverty remain in poverty. Where the California dream, the American dream, which is predicated on social mobility, is absolutely in jeopardy. This is the issue of our time. This is an issue that will define our moment and our collective responsibility. Again, we're all stuck in this traffic. This is the issue that I hope defines a disproportionate amount of the conversation you're having today and the conversation that I hope will ensue over the course of many years as you build on these unique partnerships. I'm not someone like a lot of politicians that begrudges other people's success. I don't. I love celebrating other people's success. But it's just interesting in a world where the 6 Walmart heirs, this is not an indictment of them, but the 6 Walmart heirs collectively have as much wealth as 40% of Americans. That is not a sustainable model. You can't make that up. 8.8 million people living below the poverty line in the state of California with those supplemental poverty rates that you guys were discussing, Bud was discussing earlier today. More people living below the poverty line in California than any other state in raw numbers and, yes, percentage terms. Our state, a coastal economy and an inland economy. 3.0% unemployment in the non-seasonally adjusted numbers, the lowest San Mateo County, highest still in the state, 21.6 in Imperial County. We are living in 2 different worlds in the same state. Heck, living in 2 different worlds in the same counties. We have got to reconcile this. And so I offer that as a final point of caution before I conclude in the context of the greatest threat to social mobility, and that is globalization and information technology. It's not just the hyper-financialization of the economy. That's a big part of it. But something big is happening with labor-saving automation. Something big is happening because no longer do we just have, as business people, access to cheap labor. We also have access to cheap genius. We have a world brain that we are all building, and all of us increasingly have access to that. And the ability to scale, and the ability to concentrate, and the ability to grow in real time creates tremendous pressure on this fundamental point. And so I hope that today you all think radically differently about these challenges than you have in the past. And we recognize the disruptive nature of the world we're living in, but with optimism and expectation, as always, that the best is yet to come. Thank you guys very, very much.
I see somebody in the back. One person has a question.
All right, that's good. 0 would be great. 1 is good. Sir.
Thank you. I think you set up this question so well. I feel like you didn't have time to answer it. Between that entrepreneurial economy that we're seeing thriving, and I don't think there's anything about it that is going to help us, as you kind of suggested, in dealing with income inequality. So what do you see how do you merge those 2 energies and still take on income inequality?
Yeah, I mean, this is look, the tech genie's out of the bottle. I mean, this was the big debate yesterday in San Francisco. I mean, you're not going to stuff the future. You can't stop it. You're going to have to live with it. I mean, as much as we long for the days we can walk into a Blockbuster, they're over. All right? I'm just saying, right? So how do we address this? Now, I've been on 6 or 7 panels in the last 6 months, literally 1 a month, with some of the best and the brightest minds, from Laura Tyson to Reid Hoffman, Eric Schmidt. Title of every one of these conversations, The Future of Work. Went down with my friend Peter Diamandis, who runs the X Prize, Singularity University at NASA Ames. Big panel, Future of Work. And what do we need to do as a society to address the anxiety of a world that's best been defined as a 401k world, right? It's defined contributions now. It's no longer defined benefits. Retirement security, as we have come to enjoy it in the past, is giving way to tremendous anxiety and fear, something radically different. These contribution platforms in the share economy are hardly the kind of jobs that give you tremendous security, particularly when you consider what Elon Musk said just yesterday, where he said, in the next 20 years, there will simply not be a car out on the road that is allowed to be driven by a human being. What does that mean to every one of those Uber drivers? What does that mean to every truck driver and UPS driver? And by the way, I would have thought that hyperbole if I had not gotten a call. It is so good when Governor Brown is out of the state, because you finally, it's just so good. I finally got a call. I said, someone called. Wow. Take a breath. I picked up the phone. I said, yes, sir. They said, well, considering the governor's out of town, do you want to join us? The chief engineer from Germany of Audi is coming to Sears Point. Says he wants to take you on a little ride into the future. I said, what has he got in mind? He says, well, he's got a driverless car. I said, honestly, I don't have time. I've done that. I was down in Mountain View. I was trying to impress him. I said, I was down there with Larry Page himself, down there driving in the parking lot, one of those driverless cars. I said, I've been in the future. I said, it's very exciting. He said, no, you haven't. I said, all right, convince me. I'll show up. Sears Point is hardly a big circle. Anyone's been to Sears Point, it is an interesting raceway. I get in the car, put on a helmet. It goes from green, orange, or rather red, orange, green. All of a sudden, I have a kill switch and a big helmet in the passenger seat. Ain't anyone else around. Black Audi. This is 2 weeks ago. And we just take off. I'm not making it up. Right out of the movies. We go right in to the barrier. Missed it by an inch. And then we go right in to this cone that was on the left. We go from 0 to 20, 30, back down to 5, go around the corner. Got up to 108 miles an hour, God is my witness. 108 damn miles an hour in a driverless car. 2 laps. And when I got done, they said, that's at 70% of what this car can do. That's technology that exists today. So what Elon said a couple months ago, I would have said, that's wildly exaggerating, Elon. Now it scares the hell out of me. What do we do with those UPS drivers? Right? It's not just the drones that are going to be delivering, right? So it creates this anxiety. Now, you asked a question that I can't answer, so this is me completely misdirecting the answer so I can get away with making you think I'm smart when, in fact, I don't know anything about this. So we have spent the last few months trying to answer this question, and it scares the hell out of me. The best folks we can find, and they're not able to answer this question. That's how alarming it is. It was best described. Someone said, you know what, we're living in a world with no ceilings anymore, no walls, meaning limitless possibility, but also no floor. Right? We've always had that safety net. I mean, it was amazing. I can't talk too much out of school, but when I listened to 3 billionaires on my mother's grave, 3 billionaires all say, I won't say who, that we need a minimum, not wage, a minimum annual salary in the United States of America. That is a pretty alarming statement. That they believe that's the only way we're going to navigate this hinge moment in the white waters of change. That it's that profound what's happening with technology and automation. That its disruptive power is going to be so potent and so potentially disruptive to what it means to be human. Remember what Voltaire said? What is a job? It deals with 3 sins, right? Vice and boredom and need. It's what it means to be human. And so this is a question we must ask and answer, and I am committed to answering that question in a much more profound way than just saying, all right, we need universal preschool, universal health care for everyone, regardless of immigration status, a higher minimum wage, yes, a living wage, lower cost education, no student, all those wonderful things. Those are the toolkits for a world that no longer exists. Those are wonderful things, absolutely necessary. And by the way, when I was mayor, we had the highest minimum wage in the United States, only paid sick leave in the United States, universal health care for all undocumented workers, universal preschool fully implemented, the highest living wage, the highest inclusionary housing, more affordable housing bonds. All of that means nothing to the folks living in the Mission District right now, because the highest level of income inequality in the United States of America is the city I left behind. So if you think all those things, as profoundly important as they are going to solve the problem, they're not. They're absolutely critical and necessary. Do not lose your advocacy for those things. My gosh, do not. But they're not sufficient. And that's why your question is a profound one, and all of us are going to have to figure out the answer. Sir, let's get positive here. All right. We can talk about, the snow in the mountains right now.
My question is, in light of our recent military adventures, what's going to happen to the veterans that are returning to this country? I don't hear a lot of talk about, using or converting that capacity fully enough. Everybody's sorry about the experiences at the VA, but you don't see any meaningful bridges into reuniting with the community and families.
Yeah, I mean, the question about vets it goes back to my antidote to cynicism. And that is, one thing I've learned, and I am literally up and down this state. I was milking cows in Hanford. You know someone is running for governor when they're milking cows in Hanford, okay? And by the way, it was wonderful, and I encourage all of you to do it. Seriously. So I'm out there. I am everywhere. And one of the great things, I mean this with conviction, there is not a problem that hasn't been solved by somebody somewhere in the state of California. Not one, including veteran services. I can give you half a dozen extraordinary programs that are answers to your question, that are doing amazing things. I could show you partnerships with cities and counties and towns that are doing big tax breaks to private business to hire a vet, that are doing real things to reach out and create real opportunities and workforce training, and taking that mindset and that grit and that determination and that creativity that exists in the minds of every vet and putting it to good use. I have a friend who started a company exclusively for vets. His whole thing is horticulture, and he's actually creating these plug-and-play systems that allow vets to immediately deploy these systems that are completely green and renewable and energy independent in areas that have food scarcity to address some of those issues at the same time. The question is scale, and the question is resolve. So the answer is out there. A lot of great things are happening, including, by the way, in San Francisco. Vet Connect, something I'm very proud of when I was mayor, that Mayor Lee is now built on, doing some really good things, but not at the scale that the vets deserve, unquestionably. So this should be a commitment. Patriotism doesn't end when someone takes off their uniform. These are folks sacrificed, like my grandfather was a prisoner of war in Corregidor, who literally took his life 6 months after he came back from 5 years as a prisoner of war. This is personal to me, not just, I imagine, to you and many other folks in this room. I have extraordinary admiration for our vets, and we cannot make the mistakes we made after the Vietnam War and turn our backs on all these folks. So count me as committed.
Actually, Kate, we have one more.
Gavin, this is also on a personal note. I know that you had extraordinary success in dealing with the military in San Francisco, especially military-based recovery programs. Yeah. In this region, we rely over $1.5 billion on the military economy that contributes to our partnership here. And in that regard, there is a complete shift in the paradigm adjustment that's going on in D.C. about changing the military. And they're much more thinking about the security questions that have to do with cybersecurity. That's definitely in the paradigm you're talking about. How do you think that's going to affect defense in the future, California in particular? I know the governor's got a group that talks about this every 2 months.
Yeah, no, this scares the heck out of me. By the way, there's another book that I think is must reading. It's such a powerful book by a guy who is actually a teacher at Singularity University, last name Goodman, and the book is called Future Crimes. He's the futurist, who would have thought, for the FBI. The FBI has a futurist, and the book's title is Future Crimes, and he will paint a picture about cyber crimes that will send chills up your back, but also lays out some very prescriptive things we can be doing, not just in the private sector, but municipalities, significantly states, and obviously the federal agencies. But this is the new, we all need to lean in to this space and understand it more fully. And that's the fear we all have, right? Everyone says, well, meet people where they are. Why don't we have online voting? There's legitimate fear about people hacking in those systems. What you all saw, right? Leslie Stahl. I don't know if you saw 60 Minutes 6 months ago. There was Leslie Stahl. She's in her car. She knows it's about to be hacked. Someone takes over the steering wheel, and she panics, even though she knew it was about to come. Someone was sitting on their laptop, literally like this, just took over the car. That's not, so cars are now just computer chips which you ride in. Imagine when they're all driverless and you got someone, North Korea, sorry, playing around. Put this down. So, yeah. So this is a big deal, and I give the governor credit, but we got to do a hell of a lot more than we have. And by the way, the most vulnerable agencies in the state of California are institutions of higher learning. And you think I exaggerate? Ask the folks at UCLA that just experienced one of the big cyber attacks in the United States of America last year, or this year. Early in the calendar year, their health system, millions of records were breached. We had our lawyer come in at the UC Regents and tell the regions what the potential liability is and exposure to you, the taxpayers, of every one of those instances, and there are millions of it. Jaw-dropping. That's why I should have gone to law school and been a class action lawyer. It is jaw-dropping. So there is an economic cost on the back end, not just the front end, as it relates to cybersecurity. And California should lead. I know our time's up, but let me just say a couple quick things in closing because it's relevant. You know, one of the things that I love doing, I love history. And in many ways, the antidote to our problems in California is just reading our own history. Because one night long ago, we were the tentpole of the American economy, right? Remember in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, no state grew jobs at an annual rate, the state of California. In fact, PPIC mashed up these numbers about a year ago. They put this report out. It really underscored this in numerical terms. We grew at an annual rate of 3.7% in annual job creation, not GDP, during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. No one came close. The nation, an impressive clip, 2.2%. We grew at 3.7%. What's happened since 1980? Decade of the 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010, 3.7 to 1.1%. The nation is now outperforming the state of California in annual job creation. So what was it about the 50s and 60s and 70s that made California the essential state in terms of economic growth, economic opportunity, economic development, and job creation? Well, go back. It's not that confusing. Father Cause, my old teacher at Santa Clara University, taught the course called Econ 101. It's every single thing you guys are talking about today. Started with education, the finest K through 12 education system, not just system of higher learning, which, by the way, includes, let's remember, the community college system. Let us not forget the backbone of our education system in the state of California, 113 campuses, the power of the community colleges to be a solution to so many of the problems in terms of entering into a workforce of the future. And number two, we had what I hope there's a couple folks. I wasn't here, but I've heard Lenny in the past. It was everything Lenny was talking about, infrastructure, right? Remember when we were the envy in terms of our roads, bridges, airports, and water systems? Pat Brown's days? I mean, literally the envy of the world. Then it was, and this is what triggered it, robust research and development. I mean, think about where we are. Lawrence Livermore Labs, Lawrence Berkeley Labs, Sandia Labs, NASA Ames, UCSF, UC Davis, UC System down here. I mean, we were the lion's share beneficiary of federally funded research and development. No state benefited more from R&D than the state of California. Number four, we had an open immigration policy, right? We used to love to say, if we're not conveying talent from our systems of higher learning, we always, in the vernacular of sports, we always got first-round draft choices, right? The best and the brightest would come to California. We had an open immigration system, and we had rulemaking that encouraged risk-taking, but not like recklessness. Flexibility in our rulemaking. Look at those 5 categories today, right? Lenny laid out, I imagine, the deficit in California's infrastructure. Let's talk about K through 12 education in California, or all the sand in the gears we put to higher education with all those cuts the last 5 or 6 years. Let's talk about what happened. Remember sequestration? You forgot about it. You shouldn't. We were devastated by it with all the federally funded cuts in R&D. And look at immigration. My gosh, you got a possible leading candidate to be soon in Rubio, who's against the proposal that he was advocating for on immigration reform just 6 months ago. It's so damn confusing. And you have a new Speaker of the House who I like and know well, who said he has no interest in having a discussion with the President of the United States. How's that for turning the page in a new day? No interest having a conversation with the President of the United States on immigration reform as long as he's president. That's maturity. And look what's happening on rulemaking. I imagine someone brought up CEQA here today. I'm not saying anything about CEQA, but I imagine someone did, right? I just imagine everyone, I mean someone, right? I'm not, don't write, he's called for CEQA reform. I can't handle the getting out front on marriage or marijuana. I already have problems. I don't need any more problems, all right? But we got some work to do on regulation, broadly, right? We have a lot of work generally on immigration. Channel 5 here. Careful. So, got to read our own history. Got to rediscover California. The state of dreamers, of doers, of entrepreneurs, of innovators. A state that has long prided itself on being on the leading and cutting edge of new ideas. More researchers, more venture capital, more Nobel laureates than any other part of the globe. The most diverse state, again, in the world's most diverse democracy. What an extraordinary place. What an extraordinary place. And now with these new partnerships you're forming, bottom up, not top down thinking, I have all the confidence in the world that our fate and future is secure. Thank you guys very, very much.